Hello there, and welcome to the value of everything. Okay, so I'm going to try and propose a theory. Obviously, when I put forward a theory, it's not necessarily true. It's definitely open to any kind of rebuttal or any counters, suggestions otherwise. But I'm just going to put the theory out there. It's kind of interesting because I am from this stance, so I do have some kind of background in this area, just from a first-person perspective. But yeah, we're just going to explore how dyslexia is potentially an advantage, and maybe even an evolutionary advantage to mankind. So, just to start things off, we do seem to have 1 in 10 of us in the population, it doesn't really matter on race or anything else, which seem to have this, which is normally broadcast as a learning difficulty. And that's a really high level of people who have got this learning difficulty in the population. It's almost to a certain extent. When you say like there's a mutation or there's somebody that has got some kind of deformity, usually you would find that it's bred out of the population. So I guess whenever there is somebody that has got an ill affliction, they really probably don't find a life partner, and they do not get to spread the genes onto their children and carry on further. And usually you would find these genes sort of harbored in humans, and they're just very discreetly hidden behind. And every once in a while, when you have two partners which do have the same genes, then this I guess problem or mutation does appear, but it usually spreads to about 0.01% of the population. But when you're talking about a full 10% of the population, there is an interesting thing which is going on, and it does suggest that there is some kind of if it's 10% of the population, there is some kind of advantage which is being played out here, which means that they can a person who has got dyslexia can actually get on by quite well in society, and thus has acquired a number of resources. So if we look from the men's perspective, they have acquired a lot of resources, and therefore it has been able to procreate. So very interesting things. So let me explain my story. So when I was young and I was attending school, I sort of was interested in like reading and books, but I think I was more taken away by the images and the drawings and the artwork of books, more so than the stories. Now, when teachers or my parents would read me stories, I was taken away with the imaginative stories. I was definitely absorbed into those worlds. It wasn't like I was really just really afraid of stories and reading and imagination and things like that. But the thing of actually sitting down and reading text on a page seemed to be a very daunting task, particularly when I sort of assumed or I looked around the classroom and saw that people were highly advanced in comparison to what I was. So that just really sort of put me off from the onset. And I remember just looking at a page and just seeing a lot of words, sort of assessing how hard the text is going to be to read. And I would see the small words, and then I'd look at the large ones thinking, oh my gosh, how am I going to get to the end of this sentence? It's particularly when I was reading out aloud, that was kind of scary in a classroom situation as well. Really nervous if we was all having rounds of speaking a different part of the sentence. That would be I would feel the nerves trickling over my body when it came to my turn. So I guess there is sort of where I was sort of pushed and pulled into a reading environment, it did definitely. I think it was sort of a counter against me, because then I learned to dislike reading and didn't really want to be part of it. And as people were just highlighting and assessing that I did have problems and I was at a lower level in the classroom, people were obviously that really just put me off completely the art of reading. But there was one little area which did sort of flourish a little bit later, was more so factual information. Whenever I found that there was a piece of information that led me to a certain point, and this information did have a certain reward, not just to sort of just show the teacher that I could display my reading skills, but actually got me to a point of understanding something, or got me to a point of knowing how to change a light bulb, any kind of thing that which actually had some kind of end goal, then the difficulty of reading wasn't really a problem. I sort of obviously struggled with a lot of words. The vocabulary wasn't as wide and varied as a lot of others, but it really just flowed from that point. And even though it probably does take me a little bit longer to read in comparison to a lot of other kids, there really wasn't too much of an issue in terms of me finding out information, reading fairly difficult books to acquire knowledge. It really hasn't been a hindrance to me. Sometimes there has been things where I've maybe overread a few words here and there and not quite got the gist of the sentence, and rather than reading should, or shouldn't, I've read should, but it's really not necessarily too much of an affliction there. I guess in terms of just like assessing myself in the classroom in general, that was probably like the biggest problem for me. And obviously when it came to writing, even though I seem to have like an ability to write with both hands, I could write in a number of different texts and I could write fairly nice, pretty handwriting, but I obviously didn't know how to spell words. It always came down to the words where the actual letters didn't really reflect how, well, the way that the letters sound didn't reflect how they were actually written. So silent letters were always a little bit of an issue for me. So again, that was a bit of a problem, and I would obviously just write it down how they were spoken, so the text and everything else was a bit rubbish. Now, interestingly, there are, I think the word is phonetic, but there are different countries which use a better, well, the English language has a lot of silent letters, but when it comes to like a country like Spain or Italy, the actual words are a little bit more how they are, all the letters are sounded. So it's a little bit easier from those countries, and dyslexia can be disguised a little bit more so in those countries. Also, there's an interesting theories in terms of China, where it's more of a logo which you're writing. So that's kind of interesting. Now, as I've developed and continued over time, I'm not sure if anybody sort of uses this method of writing, but whenever I write a word, I sort of visualize it, and then I try and write it as to what I represent it as a visualization, in comparison to actually knowing like all the silent letters, how they flow from one to the other, and spelling out the letters after another. It's kind of interesting. It's a little bit faster, I would guess, for me to comprehend the words by visualizing the words in comparison to let's say sounding them out and remembering all the English grammar rules, one thing after another. Okay, so these were obviously definite disabilities in the classroom, and obviously when it came to examinations, this did also have an incredible disadvantage on my side. When it came to IQ tests, that's one of the little snags with dyslexia, is that I did actually perform quite highly. I think I got a score of like 116 or something around that range. I haven't really tested myself for a long time since then, but that's fairly high above the average. I guess the average is 100. But obviously, when it came to reading text, reading exam papers, I would have miscomprehension of things, and I remember a lot of things when there was tick boxes, or if I would have to, even worse, which would be where I'd have to write things down. If the examiner couldn't even read what I was writing, then obviously it would be a fail. So there is obviously a big driver in schooling systems of writing and reading and comprehension. It's a bit of a disadvantage for dyslexia, but I'll just move over to one other area. So, our ability to visualize is, I've always noticed that there was definitely an advantage on my side in comparison to other kids with my ability to visualize 3D images. So if I was going to draw a 3D cube, I could easily draw that within a split second, and there'll be no issue whatsoever. I think there's like an Escher painting where there's a waterfall which goes one thing down to the other. I sort of found that drawing fascinating, and it was like an interesting 3D image, which was like an optical illusion at the same time. I would be like quite kind of interested, and I would write and I would do artwork which would represent that quite a lot. And when it came to knowing perspectives, distances, if I was going to do anything sort of architectural sort of drawings or graphics work, I could definitely transfer 3D images onto a page without any issues whatsoever. So I guess it's a definite technical advantage over kids, and it's a very interesting technical advantage why you would have that over other kids in comparison to your reading and this learning skill when it comes to reading and writing. Mathematics, again, I'll just cover that one a little bit briefly. I seem to grasp sort of patterns in mathematics quite well, so I could work out how patterns and rhythms and things would comprehend pretty rapidly. Now, if it came to reciting times tables, that probably was a little bit of a problem for me, but I guess it is for a lot of people anyway. But with a little bit more training and a little bit more repetition, then it would become a little bit more. It would comprehend to me a little bit easier. But mathematics was never really. It wasn't really necessarily an incredibly strong point for me, but in some areas, some points where I could work out patterns and I could work out that there was a little bit of a trick or a shortcut in formulas, then I could quickly grasp that. And then once I've solved the problem and I've worked out how to comprehend a certain mathematical problem, then I could replicate it and I would seem to rise to the top of the class in certain areas. But I didn't really practice it that often, and I would neglect homework and all these kind of things. So it was never like I was the top performer or anything like that in those respects. But so I was going back and forth. But okay, so another thing which is always interesting is whenever there's like a problem or there's a problem solving situation and people need to come up with ideas, I've always found that I could come up with ideas quite rapidly, and I could shoot off another idea after another idea, while a lot of people would just be sitting there and just being quiet. Now, either they could be quite nervous, or maybe I could be outgoingly confident. Could be just something to do with my personality characteristics, but I don't think it's necessarily personality. If you're coming up with ideas, and if you've just got a mild sense of confidence, then you should be able to give them out. So there is something in terms of a broader picture, getting sort of an idea from something, grasping ideas, getting knowledge, taking it and then applying it somewhere else. And it seems like when it comes to granular information, when you really dig down deep, I seem to get a little bit, I guess I get not quite the full grasp of things. I don't go into the full nitty-gritty and the details. However, sort of like how my thoughts and everything is collected is that I just like to know a little bit of knowledge of everything, and then I take a little slice of my memory and apply it to somewhere else. And I guess there is a certain element of curiosity which I have, which I guess maybe something to do with just the way that I'm fascinated, or I find things interesting, or things I find things. Maybe I find it as an advantage over other kids that I knew this little bit of information, and then I just spanned it from there. So maybe I'm sort of a reactionist, so I don't. Maybe I wasn't good at comprehending English and language skills, but I was fascinated by other facts and information, and I counteracted that with pooling this knowledge together. But definitely, say like we go to like a training day or something like that, and people ask these problem-solving situations, I definitely will be one of the most outspoken people in that situation. Maybe sometimes I get some things wrong, but I do find that I do have an advantage. I'm usually either number one or number two in terms of like a class of 30 in terms of coming up with solutions. So I guess there is a bit of an advantage of having me in a team. I guess it's not necessarily if we're all doing some very monotonous task. I guess I definitely have problems with consistency. Some days I am very good, sometimes I'm very bad in terms of performing and producing the same piece of work. So there is definitely it's not a good thing to have me in a very sort of manual piece of the mill sort of processing area. But when it comes to sort of like a holistic perspective view and coming up with solutions, there has definitely been some kind of advantages. Now, when it comes to the human populace, you can obviously see how somebody with dyslexia is going to do fairly well, but obviously at first they're going to be very much disadvantaged. So if somebody who has dyslexia is able to get past the barriers of English and spelling and grammar, work on the problems of consistency, and then get to a higher level of where he's using, or she is using, their comprehension skills to say the king or queen, or say to the government, or to the head of a company, then you do have an incredible advantage over a lot of other people. I guess there is, when it comes to social skills, I guess that's another area, I guess, potentially to do with confidence, but I seem to do quite well in social situations. I've never had any problems with understanding other people's emotions. I do have empathy, so it's never been an issue in those terms as well, just for me to get on by in society, just to be normal, just to, I guess, find a girlfriend or any of those kind of things. So, or find a friend. Yeah, so it's dyslexia can be a very interesting thing where you can filter into society. You potentially might just seem to be a very low achiever, but you can sort of whisk away into society as you're thinking that you're pretty much not. You've got a good idea of things, but you're not very clever in the skills which the teachers and the schooling system is telling you. Okay, so just another interesting thing is that dyslexia is relatively common among business entrepreneurs, and it's a real. It's like I think the population of entrepreneurs that are out there. I think they've done certain tests, but the amount of people with dyslexia in that area is vastly over what there should be in just the natural population. So if it's 10% when it comes to entrepreneurs, I think it's something in the region of like 30%, potentially even higher. So there's two obvious areas here. one of them is that with dyslexia, you have heightened intelligence, or may have good intelligence skills, but you may not have the qualifications. So that definitely puts you in sort of a category of trying to work out a different way of earning some money, and that potentially makes you a business owner, or potentially gets you into a situation where you've got to set up your own business from scratch and build from that point. Now, you might have all the skills there for yourself, except maybe the English and maths or those kind of areas of comprehension. But when it comes to taking ideas, applying it somewhere else, you do definitely have an advantage. And this is where entrepreneurs dyslexia and entrepreneurs seem to marry up quite well. Richard Branson is a fairly famous entrepreneur, which is in that category. He has declared himself as dyslexic, so it's interesting in those points there. Now, I'm just going to come to the summing up of this as well. So the question is, obviously I said, is dyslexia an evolutionary advantage? Now, there's either an advantage or there's a compensation. Now, either we could be compensating for certain ailments or problems with the way that our brain is communicating to one hemisphere to another. Therefore, there is compensations which are happening. If you suppress somebody for so long, then they will they will harden, and then they will uprise eventually. So it potentially is a compensation for inadequacies or things that you're not quite good at. You are trying to push yourself in a different direction. There's the other theory, which is when it comes to Mother Nature, potentially they're testing something. Or evolution is testing something when it comes to the human population. It may be a situation where there's certain genetic mutations which are occurring, which is testing out how we can further intelligence. Now, we are probably destructing certain parts of our comprehension of the English language, that part of our brain, in comparison to spatial awareness, 3D imaging, and things like that. Now, another thing that's just quite interesting, particularly when it comes to memory recognition and things like that, or memory retention, is that we do have certain different skills in terms of short-term memory, long-term memory, and how we store memory. Now, some of the best card readers, or the people that can remember one card after the other, use a certain part of their brain, which is using sort of like, I guess it's the spatial awareness part of the brain, which I think does slightly marry up with dyslexia as well. So if you can retain information and knowledge in this spatial awareness part of the brain, it does give people a certain advantage. And I guess, shall we say, they can proceed to... Let me just think on this point. Yeah, so if it potentially is like an opening of the door in terms of where you're using that spatial awareness brain, you're removing yourself from the language skills, and you're trying to get a little bit further in some area. Now, another point which is quite interesting is that there is a little bit of a correlation between intelligence and madness. Now, yeah. Well, one thing that obviously always comes to mind is like Asperger's syndrome, dyslexia. There's a lot of ailments and intelligence things which occur, potentially even depression as well, which occurs and comes up when you have heightened intelligence. Now, this is an interesting perspective, and maybe there are certain problems and flaws which kick in when you do have heightened intelligence, Sometimes you do have issues. I've heard before that the brain can't expand too much, or the connections don't work as well, and the brain can't shrink too small, or you lose capacity. So there is some kind of trade-offs potentially which is occurring, which give us advantages and disadvantages in Mother Nature. Now, if we were in a society, and it's interesting, I've always mentioned this before, that the society that we seem to be moving on to, which is less of the English skills. I guess in the past I would need to be a writer. I'd need to write this all down on a typewriter and then go to print and find editors to go through all my dyslexic language and rewrite it again. But now we're in a society where I can use this on a podcast and I can share it with you. It seems to be that there are advantages to being dyslexic in society, particularly when it comes to taking a derived information from one place to the other and then applying it and using entrepreneurial skills. Because one of the key things which is happening to the very drill down sort of recite information and regurgitate it is that we do have the internet and we do have automation. So skills of humanity and skills of taking ideas, skills of comedy, all of these things which probably could be harboured in people with dyslexia is really coming to the fray. But I guess the schooling system and examination systems is really finding it hard to catch up. Now, also, if you think in terms of entrepreneurs, if you are creating an entrepreneur in society, they are a massive wealth generator. They are probably the best things that you can create in society, probably quite closely to scientists, mathematicians and engineers, which also are areas of where dyslexia is quite high. So very interesting perspectives there. And when you take it into sort of the perspective that people, now obviously the more historical figures I don't think we can really test, but there is indications that Albert Einstein, Henry Ford, Edison, there's a number of other characters throughout history. I think Spielberg recently came out mentioning that he had dyslexia. There's a number of people throughout society who have enriched humanity. And imagine the world that we would live in if we didn't have those people around. So there is definitely an evolutionary advantage, or potentially by the compensation strategy, or just literally Mother Nature finding an advantage and they procreating and creating a better world. But I guess it is classed in the school systems as a learning disability. But there are definite advantages, and if people did sort of highlight advantages of 3D imagery and comprehension and ideas and problem solving, which probably isn't as much on the educational examination boards, then, and it's pretty much very hard to assess it anyway at the best of times. Society does get a little bit hampered by diagnosing and labeling dyslexia as a difficulty, an affliction, whereby it is definitely problematic in different stages of your life. But from my personal perspective, if I had the choice to either keep my dyslexia and not have my problem solving skills, or I was a little bit artistic as well, and my ideas, I would rather keep all of those things and keep dyslexia at the same time, rather than just being losing all those abilities and being, I guess, a little bit more square. So, thank you very much for your time on this one. If you've got any other comments, if you've got any other theories, I guess like there's a little idea of like how some things can be seen as a bit of a problem at first. Say if you think of the human eyeball, there was cells first which were light sensitive. Probably those cells were a bit of a disadvantage at first, but over time they developed into being a full eye, which is all of our visualizations and comprehension from that point onwards. There may be certain things which are happening in terms of the brain and how learning difficulties may seem to be the first thing, may be an advantage in the future. So thank you very much for your time. If you've got any other comments or suggestions, please forward them on, and I shall speak soon. Thank you very much. Goodbye.